Everybody, good to see you all today. Thank you for being here for class. Well, the freezing streak has broken. 35 this morning when I got up. So, and it's supposed to get in the 40s today, I think, low 40s. That'd be nice. In January, not yet, right?
It's January, February will be next Saturday.
Next week, yeah, I want to say, January's still here for a little while. Yeah. If it's not, I'm really bad. My calendar's real off. But happy to have you today. Let's open in prayer. Lord, I thank you for this time to be here and study together the scriptures. I pray that you'll help us understand and be blessed with your teachings, especially of calling us to be doulos, servants, slaves of Christ, and what that means. And God, I pray you'll give us great understanding and keep us from all evil. For your glory, amen. Well, we've been doing a little side study with the word doulos and slaves. Let's go to 1 Peter chapter 2. And taking some time to look at that and explain to you that slavery at the biblical time is nothing near what in Greece and Rome, in the Greco-Roman world, was nothing compared to what it became in Europe and America in the 1800s, and what also was happening in Africa at that time, and then up in Saudi Arabia and Iran, Iraq, those countries as well. And that the Bible does not support what happened in America, and the biggest reason is because it was an atrocity to humans, and that God never is in favor of you making someone less than a person. Our government even said, in counting slaves in America, they were 3/5 of a person. Bruce, did you point that out to us last week? Yeah, that they were only 3/5 in the census in counting, and that they didn't have any rights. They weren't even allowed to be educated. That's not what the Bible does not support. That never supported that, and shame on people in churches that thought so, because they were just using their sinful hearts and going to the Bible to try to make it say what they wanted it to say, to do what they did. But the slavery that is referred to in the Greco-Roman world at the time of the Bible was very akin to apprenticeship, or to an opportunity to be educated, and you're in debt to the person that's educating you or teaching you a trade or educating you. There were people that were doctors that were slaves at the time because they were indebted to their learning, and not like it is today, but different. There were people that worked for the governments. There were people that were in charge of civil affairs. There's people that did work in homes and in offices. All kinds of industry had servants or slaves, and they were only a slave in the sense in relationship to the work. What do I mean by that? Only a slave in relationship to the work. Yes, and so when they went home, they were free. At home, they're free. But if the boss calls them on the cell phone and says, come on in, you need to do this, what did they have to do? Had to go to work. So when it came to the work,
They had their own homes?
many did,
Okay, and
some didn't.
And some might have lived in there with the ones they were working for? Like
They may have, yeah, but the point I want to make is that it's not It wasn't an unconditional slavery where they were owned by the person. The definition that the Bible is using for this is someone whose person and service belong wholly to another. And that's why it's so good to talk about where they talk about a slave of Jesus, to be a slave of God, because he's the one who I belong to. And when it comes to God as your master, your king, your Lord, he owns how much of it? 100% of it. So all of it. And it's a good analogy to use to understand. But sinful hearts abuse things and hurt things. Now, we went last week through many of the New Testament passages that talk about being a slave and slave to Christ and other things. But then Sandy asked a very good question, and then she left us. She had to go take care of a the fellowship. What's it called? Yeah, coffee fellowship. And she was gone, so I didn't want to answer her question without her here. So do you mind asking your question again, Sandy?
I think it had to do. And
I remember, but you go ahead.
Okay, I think it had to do because we were talking about the slavery and that so many masters were good and they were caring and treated their slaves with kindness and respect. And then I asked, well, what about the ones that were evil?
Yes, because there were ones just as evil as many that were evil as were good, because of the sinful heart of man, kind of a thing. So she asked that question, well, does the Bible address that, or what about that? And I'm glad you asked that, because that brings us right back to our passage that we started this with, 1 Peter chapter 2. So if you go with 1 Peter chapter 2 with me, please. And verse 11 in the NIV has a heading says, living godly lives in a pagan society. And he's going to talk about how do you live a godly life in a pagan society. And verse 13 says, submit yourselves for the Lord's sake to every human authority, whether to the emperor as supreme authority, to governors who are sent by him to punish those who do wrong, condemn those, and commend those who do right. For it is God's will that by doing good, this is the key, verse 15. This is one of the things that God wants us to understand in all of our relationships. It is God's will that by doing good you should silence the ignorant talk of foolish people. So, what is it that we need to be doing in all of our relationships? To be doing what? Good. Now, we had a message on doing good not too long ago, if you remember. What I hope you won't forget so soon. What is basically the idea of doing good is to do what?
Right.
Live like Jesus.
Thank you, Valerie. You won the class. You made them all look good here today. To live like Jesus, to think like, to speak like, and act like. You remember that? To speak like, think like, and act like Jesus. That's what it means to do good. And that's the key for us. So he says then in verse 15 I read, 16, live as free people. Do not use your freedom as a cover-up for evil. Live as God's slaves. So see, the concept of slaves in the New Testament is not an evil one. It is not a wicked one. It's not a debilitating one. It's not treating people like animals. It's not hurting people and all those things. That's not the concept. The concept is your will has been turned over to another who's going to be in charge of you. It doesn't have anything to do about the punishment and the physical abuse. It has to do with you don't run your life, they do, because you owe it to them for either the training, skill, education, housing, food, whatever it is they're providing for you in that culture. Now, so that, therefore, he can bring it. Now, can you imagine if you're thinking of slavery as we had in America? I'll use America as an example, and reading that with that in mind, to live as God's slaves, and thinking that the word slaves there means to live as the way slaves in our country lived. The two do not mix. They don't go together. It's completely opposite. I can't stress that enough to you in understanding it.
But that was the question, is that with the harsh, ungodly, evil, you know.
We're getting to it. Hang in.
All right.
Hang in there.
Come on, push on.
I gotta wait till you leave to take care of refreshments again. So show proper respect to everyone in this context. Show proper respect to everyone. Love the family of believers. Fear God and honor the emperor. Now he's going to direct his attention in verse 18. Peter picks this up. Slaves, in reverent fear of God, submit yourselves to your masters. Now the problem is, we use the same terminology in this land with slavery that we had in America. What are the two terms that we use the same? Slave and masters. So it just brings to mind, when I hear the word masters, I automatically think of what kind of things. I think of somebody whipping somebody or hurting somebody. I think of being unkind, unfair, uncaring, treating you like a dog. That's what I think of. I think of self-centeredness, selfishness, exploitation. All that just floods my head with the thoughts when you hear the term master. Same thing when you hear the term slave. You just think of all the things that we're so familiar with that happened not that long ago in our country, just a couple hundred years ago in our country. And it's hard to read the Bible and not let that affect how you're understanding it.
Yep.
But the problem is not with God and the Bible and the use of these terms, because these terms had a righteous understanding as well as a sinful, depraved understanding. And so the context is always king, and understanding what it means in its context. So he's talking to slaves. They were slaves. Some people sold themselves out to another because they could not manage their lives and their families well, and they let the person that was in charge of them take care of them, and I'll work for you for the rest of my life. I'll do whatever you want me to do. I'll gladly give up my freedom because I can't run my life. Slaves, in reverent fear of God, submit yourselves to your masters, not only to those who are good and considerate. We're getting closer, Sandy. Not only to those that are good and considerate, because many masters were. It didn't help you if you treated harshly your apprentice, kind of a situation. It wasn't helping you at all if you did that. You're hurting yourself in your own business. But there's also this situation because of human hearts and sinful hearts. Not only those who are good and considerate, but also to those that are harsh. Now, I'm going to ask you to shift gears in your mind. Think you're reading Matthew chapter 5, the Sermon on the Mount, beginning in verse 10 through 12. And recognize the context as this is true for all Christians in the world, wherever you live, regardless of your circumstances. Let's go to Matthew chapter 5. And we're going to come back to Peter. Because Peter can say this without having a problem just reminding the believers that are scattered abroad there, who many of them were now slaves because it was the only way they could provide for themselves and their family, worked for people. In the Beatitudes, beginning the verse 10 through 12, you there with me, Matthew 5? Yeah. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. What does the persecution involve? Persecution is any kind of harsh treatment to you because of your Christ-likeness, right? What's it say? Persecuted because of your terrible, evil ways, your big mouth. What does it say? Because of your righteousness. If you're following God and you're showing Christ-likeness in your life, and you're persecuted because of that, What does God say you are, cursed or blessed? He says you're blessed. And what does blessed in the Beatitudes mean? It means to be approved. To be approved by God. Approved by God are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. What has God given you as a reward for you following Christ this way? You get the whole kingdom of heaven. The person treating you harshly might own a little bit here on earth, but you get the whole kingdom of heaven. He says, blessed in verse 11, blessed are you when people insult you. Do you think that a slave in those days at that time might have a harsh ruler who insults them? Well, don't you have bosses at work, some of you sometimes, that insult you? But you know you can't speak back or take action in your own hands, or what's going to happen to you? You're going to get fired. When people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of your relationship to Jesus. So he's saying to the Christians that are slaves in the diaspora that you have a responsibility as a follower of Christ in your relationship. You may have a master that's harsh to you. Now, ultimately, what did he teach us about that? We saw last week. If you can earn or pay for or get your freedom, what should you do? You should get it. But if you're stuck and you can't, then what do? Well, you do this. You do this. So he says, rejoice and be glad. See, the inner attitude has to come from the knowledge of what awaits you, not of what you're currently going through. Because what you're currently going through could be really bad, could be really harsh. But rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward on earth.
In heaven.
In heaven. Don't expect it on earth. You'll be disappointed. If you expect that it's going to happen here and God's going to give it to you here, there's no promise about that in the Bible. The promise is in glory. Now, can he also give it to you here? Yes. But that's if he chooses to. It's not a guarantee, like heaven is the guarantee. Because in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. How much did God accept the prophets? Totally, right? Who raised them up to be prophets? And who established what they're going to go through? God. So realize you're not out of God's hand when you're going through these things. You're in with him. Now, he doesn't say be foolish and just stand there and take the beatings and say, oh, I love this. If you can avoid it, avoid it. But this is Christian life. Do you know, if we took a poll, how many Christians do you think, let's stick to our country because we're more familiar with our own country. How many Christians do you think would say, this is how I'm supposed to act?
Not too many.
I would hope it'd be 10%. Not many.
None.
Not many. And there's a couple reasons for that. One reason is because there's a line of hermeneutics that of the understanding how the scriptures relate and together, especially the two testaments, that says that the Jesus Sermon on the Mount is not for us today; it's for the Jew during the millennial kingdom. Where do you get that? Well, you do some gymnastics. You know, you ever heard the expression "figures don't lie, but liars figure" when it comes to accountants? Yeah. Well, there's some people that handle the Bible that are pretty much like accountants. They can almost make it say anything they want it to say. Well, the reason is because I don't want to go through this. I don't want to do this. Let's go back now to 1 Peter. First Peter chapter 2. So in verse 18, slaves, those who have sold themselves or in indebtedness to another person for whatever reason it may be, your job, security, take care of me, whatever it is, Now, there were slaves that were slaves because of military victory. When the Romans conquered a group of people or an army, they often turned them into slaves. He's not talking about those kind of slaves here. Those kind of slaves were kept in the military and forced to now serve that army. And guess what jobs they got?
The lousy one.
The lousy ones. They got KP all the time. But the slaves he's referring to are the ones in society that were common in society. Remember, I gave you a statistic I read that in the city of Rome itself, fully 1/3 of the residents of Rome at the time of the apostles right now were slaves. Fully 1/3. That's how the city functioned. That's how it worked. Now, go back. So slaves in reverent fear of God, submit yourselves to the masters, not only with who are good and considerate, but to those who are harsh. For it is commendable if someone bears up under the pain of unjust suffering because they are conscious of God. So when he's talking about those that are harsh, he's acknowledging that some will beat you. Right? Some may get beaten. And look at what he says next in verse 20. But how is it to your credit if you receive a beating for doing wrong and you endure it? What's he saying about that then? If you have done something that's wrong and harsh or terrible, and you're in a slave-master relationship and that master beats you for it, what does Jesus say about that?
Commendable.
You got what you deserved. Grow up. Shut your mouth. It won't happen. Do what you're told to do because you are indebted to this person for some reason. And that person is the one that's going to train you, teach you, take care of you, feed you, whatever, while you're learning or while you're working until you can get out of your relationship. But he says, I want you to endure it. But if you suffer for doing good and endure it, what is that?
Commendable.
It's commendable to whom? God. Before God. It's commendable before God. See, God has a standard that's completely different than our natural way of thinking. And that's why in Christianity that I'm familiar with today, there's such a gap, a gulf between, is gulf the right word?
Yeah.
Chasm, gulf, split, big distance, between what God is saying in harsh situations from what we think of harsh situations. Many don't think we should ever expect any kind of problem to happen in our life. Or, you can't talk to me that way. You can't cut your car in front of me. You're going to get my horn and I'm going to yell at you, pull my window and yell at you as I go past you. This kind of action. And then we're on our way to church. We get to church, everything's fine. There's a big disconnect in American Christianity. There's a big disconnect between what God tells us Christians are to look like, act like, and be like from what's normally happens and takes place. That's just a conclusion I've drawn from many, many years of this stuff and researching and referencing and seeing and examining and knowing. Just there's a big gulf, a big gap between us of what God says. This is not popular. You don't find many refrigerator magnets that will say this. And what does he use to demonstrate to you that what he's telling you is the truth? Guess what he uses?
Himself.
The life of whom?
Himself.
Of Jesus. Look at what he says here now. To this, in verse 21, to this you were called. See, God doesn't say, I want to go back here in verse 20 again. God doesn't say it was a mistake or it's something that you know you better look out for. He actually uses the word commendable. He uses the word commendable. When someone gets an accommodation, what are they getting? They're getting rewarded for doing above and beyond or what the thing says to do. You know, in the army, accommodations all the time. God says it's commendable before God. Because to this you were called. Well, what's the this? What is the this? It's right there.
Christ suffered.
That's going to be the example. But to this you were called, and he's talking about what came before and what's going to come after. You endured, and you didn't cause it, but you endured it. And to this you were called because Christ suffered for you, leaving you an example that you should follow in his steps. So suffering as a Christian is something you're called to. Man, that is not popular. That is not at all a common discussion. You know, I like the Daily Bread. I used to read it all the time, especially when I was a new Christian. Very helpful for new Christians. I really find it very helpful. Nice. And we used to read it. I worked for a Christian guy, and we were 4 of us that worked. We were all Christians, and for our coffee break, we would read the Daily Bread and talk about it. It was wonderful. But I never read in the Daily Bread anything about this. Because it's got to go past the superficial part. It's got to get down to where most people live. Because there are, in any church that's, 40 people or more, 30 people or more, there's going to be hurting people in there that are suffering wrongly and going through all kinds of terrible stuff. But they need to understand that something strange in Christianity is not happening to you. It's wrong in the society. It's wrong that it's happening to you, but it's not strange that it's happening to you. And who's our example? Well, Jesus is our example. Because Christ suffered for you, leaving you an example that you should follow in his steps. That's where the WWJD came from. I don't know if you know the story. There's a novel written, it's called In His Steps. Everybody read that novel?
Yeah.
In His Steps. It's very popular, been around for years. And has a good message. It goes a little far sometimes, but it has a good message. You should follow in his steps. Well, what did he do? He committed no sin. See, that's a very important phrase. Because if you're going through hard time and people are treating you harshly because of how you think or how you believe or what's going on in your life, it could be from a spouse, it could be from a child, it could be from a boss, it can be from a coworker, it doesn't matter who it is. Jesus committed no sin. No deceit was in his mouth. He didn't do anything wrong. But they were doing all the wrong to him. When they hurled their insults at him, he got them with a few good zingers of his own.
Yeah.
You know I'm being facetious. I'm pointing out what we normally do. If somebody's going to hail their insult at you, you're going to get one back at them. You're going to see who's got the best ones. He did not retaliate. That's a big, big thing in Christianity. A huge thing in Christianity is to not retaliate. Do not return evil for evil, insult with insult, but with blessing. To this you were called that you might inherit a blessing. It's so big in Christianity. So big. Instead, he entrusted himself. He also made no threats. Instead, he entrusted himself to him who judges justly. How did Jesus entrust himself to God when he was on that cross? How did he entrust himself, do you think? This is for you just to think about yourself. I can't go to a verse and prove it.
He submitted to God.
Submitted to the Father. Yeah. How did he entrust himself?
Completely.
Yeah, but what does entrusting mean? How does he entrust himself? Doesn't he say, God, he knew what was coming. He had to die. But I fully trust you that you're going to take care of me through this whole process of dying.
That's faith.
And you won't leave me dead. You will raise me up. He fully entrusted God. And that's how he could do what he did, was he knew that God was going to take care of him.
When Jesus was on the cross for those 3 hours, was he separated from the Lord? Turn his back?
He was on the cross actually longer than 3 hours, but for the 3 hours that he talked about, once he said, my God, why have you forsaken me? That's when he was separated from the Lord, from his Father's presence, and received his Father's wrath for our sins.
Could he pray to God? And say,
I don't know.
Okay.
I'm not going to go there. But I'm sure he kept in constant communication with the Lord. But the point to get back to with this is he entrusted himself to him who judges justly. And he wasn't receiving punishment for what he had done. That wasn't the just part. He was receiving punishment for what we did. And the just part was he came to be our Savior. He came to be our sacrifice. Behold, the Lamb of God that takes away the sin of the world. And he was going to do that. The night before in the garden, he thought so much about this that he asked 3 times to have what? If possible, take this away from me. But
Not my will.
nevertheless, not my will, but your will be done. But he's showing you his emotional feelings at the time. Nobody wants to face that. Who wants to face bearing the sin of all those that God would give him? Wow. A multitude no one can count.
Plus the physical,
And all the physical things. But I don't think the physical was as bad as the wrath of God for the punishment of people's sins. And yet he was following God. So getting back to our understanding of slaves and masters in the biblical context here, it was to act this way. Now, something interesting, let's go back to America's concept of slavery, what it went through, which is nowhere near what this is talking about. It was evil in all aspects. But were there Christians that stood above it all and came out with strong witness and testimony in spite of being whipped and considered chattel and sold and things? Were there Christians that came above it all? Yes, there were. There were some that just were shining as bright as a noonday sun, that were great examples of Christ, and will in glory be rewarded highly. Highly, highly, highly. So, Jesus in verse 23, when they hurled their insults at him, he did not retaliate. When he suffered, he made no threats. Retaliation and using your mouth to speak threats. Instead, he entrusted himself to him who judges justly. He himself bore our sins in his body on the cross, that we might die to sins and live for righteousness, by whose wounds we've been healed. For you were like sheep going astray, but now you return to the shepherd and overseer of your souls. So he uses this as the example that Christians, every Christian is to be a slave of God, a slave of Christ. So who Am I my own boss? Am I the captain of my own ship if I'm a Christian? No, I'm not. I belong to another. Is that a harsh relationship?
No.
It's the best. It's the best relationship. And the one I belong to has a right to lead me and guide me and take me any way he wants, because I'm his. And my person and my being, my whole being, belong wholly to him. And if he wants to use me to show the truth to another, to condemn another, to whatever way he wants to use me, I'm at his service to be used, is what the Bible teaches. And it's not all good. Yeah, I sometimes think today that Christians have an understanding that because I'm the Lord's, my life is to be all good. And I'm not supposed to endure any of these things because I'm a Christian. If you came to Christ or professed you came to Christ so that you could eat, drink, and be merry, you came for the wrong reason and you're not coming to the right Christ. Remember who Peter is talking to here. These people were kicked out of their country where they lived and their homes and moved as far away as they could move in the Roman Empire to Asia Minor, from Rome to Asia Minor, and had to start life all over again. What was their crime? They were Christians. That was their crime. Mm-hmm. And how much self-esteem do you think they had in that situation? Zero, that's right. Maybe even lower. But that's why he starts this book out by saying, you're called of God, you're chosen, you're dearly loved by him. And you have an inheritance, and it's not here. You have an inheritance waiting you in glory, and it will never perish, spoil, or fade. And you don't keep it, and no one else keeps it. God keeps it. It's kept in heaven for you by the power of God. And because of this great foundation we have, we can do whatever we need to do in this world that God calls us to be and to do. Because there's waiting for us this wonderful, wonderful treasure, this wonderful inheritance that he is keeping for us because of your faith in Jesus. Pam?
Just an example, when I was very, very early Christian, I accepted the Lord in Alabama, and my uncle told me about, they go house to house inviting people to church, and this one man went to this place that was not a nice place, I guess, and he invited this person to church, and he hauled off and spit right in his face. And the gentleman said, well, thank you, I never felt more like Jesus than right now.
Yeah, a lot of
And
testimonies.
he wound up coming to church, that guy.
Very good.
That's very early. I was such an early Christian.
It left a big impression, didn't it?
Oh my gosh,
Yeah.
40-something years ago.
Any other comments or questions on this paragraph so far? Okay, how we do with your answer?
It seemed like that, if I am interpreting this correctly, so the high road and the one closest to being like Jesus is to accept the persecution and the bad treatment and not
With a
to-
godly attitude,
with a God, and not to escape.
retaliate. But if you can get your freedom, do so.
But will you still be,
But you can't do it illegally.
okay, so, you know, like, the people that endure, the suffering and the harsh treatment, they're the ones that are going to be the blessed ones. So if you're taking the legal route to get out of a bad situation, are you still going to be the blessed
Yes,
one?
yeah, you were still there.
But you're not.
You're getting out early, that's fine.
escaping. So is
You
it,
got, you don't, we're not sadists. We're not people that, I'm a Christian, please beat me up.
No.
No, that's not what we are, so that I can suffer for Jesus' sake. No. If in the sovereignty of God, he has for you that you have to suffer, then you endure whatever you're enduring. But if you can escape, he says, for certain situations, and everyone's got to be looked at, then do so, because you were called to live in peace. So, some had harsh teachers, harsh masters, harsh people that they were under. And they had to endure until they paid off their debt. Or maybe they sold themselves to them. I don't know what it is, but if you can get out of it, then you do. That's just like today. If you got a terrible boss and he's treating you harshly, if you respond Christ-like, that's your responsibility. That's the good part. But God doesn't say you can't look for another job. You could look for another job. That's part of the freedoms. But understand that in the next job, you still got to treat that boss kindly too.
mm-hmm.
So you may never escape totally. And then you also got to ask yourself, and this is the first question that many people don't ask, well, what am I doing to cause them to act this way to me? Am I doing something? Am I spurring them on to this? Is it my actions, my quick tongue, my sarcasm, my disobedience? Am I doing something to cause this myself? Good questions.
Because that part that says it's commendable,
Yeah.
to do it. So I guess you really have to evaluate whether to get out of it or not get out of it. Is there going to be a better good to stay in it and endure it?
Well, more it's in the sovereignty of God. If I can get out and he lets me get out, then that's part of what he wants me to do, to get out. If in the sovereignty of God I keep trying to get out, but I can't, then I got to keep enduring. You get a chance to, God hasn't made us robots and puppets. You get a chance to examine and think, but you got to follow his leading in the doors he opens and closes. Yeah. Good questions. Any more you want to ask about this?
I'm just thinking about what Sandy's saying, and I was just looking at her countenance, and I was just thinking, like, are you asking, like, are you somehow less in favor if you're not? Like, there's not levels, like, well done, my good and faithful servant, right? I mean, that's what we want.
You mean like if you can get out and you take that route,
You're not gonna
you're
lose
not as-
love from God.
yeah, but the other side is you're not as blessed as if you stayed and endured.
So it depends on.
Yeah, it does seem like the higher road is those that stay and endure, those that get to sleep with the lions and things like that, the big,
Except God told them to
Yeah.
sleep with the lions. Not
Only,
me, maybe.
only if he doesn't allow you to do other things. If you're in it, you're in it. Kind of a thing. Other questions you have about this? I just hope that when you read in the Bible the word slavery, you don't equate that to what happened in our country. That you understand it's a different type of slavery, and it was used as a paradigm for what our relationship to God is supposed to be, and that we wholly in our person and our lives we hold wholly unto Him, and it's a good thing. Other questions? Thank you. This was a hard one, very hard. Bruce?
So I had a thought as we were talking here, and they say that life is a struggle, right? And that's kind of a universal truth. So I was trying to look at the Christian life is also a struggle, but it's a struggle for God. So does that, hopefully it gives your life higher meaning, more purpose, or just a better life overall, or a better impact, or I don't know, whatever God's plan for us. But I think, life is a struggle, and just how do we make that as beneficial and meaningful for God as we can?
Yes. What is it about us that can change like that? It's our attitude. I heard somebody say it.
Yep.
Bill, your attitude.
Yeah.
Your attitude can change instantly.
Yeah.
When your heart is set on pleasing God, your attitude will change in a godly direction. Just like a compass with the magnetic needle, it's going to go right there. If you don't change your attitude, then it's going to drag you down further and further and further. Well, what changes your attitude? God's truth is what changes the attitude. Well, I listen to God's truth. And sometimes that's all it takes. And I might be so angry at this person, and I might hate their guts at this point in my life. And yet, in the scriptures, God will show me something and see something, and right away I realize I'm sinning against the Lord, and so forth and so on. I need to change, and I change my attitude and say, Lord, I accept this, and right away the whole situation changes before me. The color of it even changes because I've changed my attitude. And I don't think that as Christians we're challenged to, in our country, Christianity in our country doesn't challenge Christians to really be followers of Christ. We're challenged to tell others about Christ a lot, and we're challenged to go to church every Sunday, but are we really challenged to think about Jesus, follow Jesus when it comes to my daily living and my finances, my language, my viewing programs, my speech, my talk, my action? Does it permeate my whole life? Or am I just having this as an aspect of my life? And this is the struggle the church has been through for years. One of the benefits about reading church history and biographies from church history, every generation goes through it. It's always a struggle.
Mm-hmm.
Always a struggle. But are we aware of it? We're at least going to be aware of it and trying to do it. Thank you for your attention with this. It's a hard one. Next week we pick up chapter 3. Start with chapter 3. You're dismissed. Enjoy your